Hello and welcome to part 2 of Marco's Marvel Monday Movie News on Marvel Movie Fan for July 13, 2015. Just to let you know, if you can see the annotations, then you should be able to skip the story by clicking on the annotation on the right side. You can go to the previous story by clicking on the left side. Or you can choose a story by clicking on the Marvel Movie Fan icon. Also, we will indicate spoilers with a spoiler sign. Now on to the news we missed. Behind the scenes footage of Ant-Man was put online. Some of this footage does not have any audio. The whole video is a little over 10 minutes long. The cast of Ant-Man had an interview with Fox 5 DC. Paul Rudd talks about how the train scene was shot and how he writes things in real life when looking small in the film. He then talks about his character's balance in personality. He then admits that he will be in Civil War and that he is done filming part of it. In the interview with Michael Douglas, Douglas talks about how they had to shoot 2 of the same lines if it contains a bad word. He then talks about having to pretend to see some special effects. Evangeline Lilly laughs when they talk about special effects because Rudd makes a shrinking noise when he pretends to shrink, and that makes it hard for her to keep a straight face. She then talks about the famous teaching how to punch scene. When talking to Peyton Reed, he talks about the details of making the train scene. Reed then talks about the changes to the script. When talking to Stoll, he also talked about the train scene. He then talks about how his suit is completely CGI. After that, he talks about how he justified Darren Cross's thought process to play that part. He lastly talks about being in House of Cards. This video is 18 minutes long. Moving on to current Ant-Man news, Marvel and MTV released a few clips of Ant-Man. The first clip is about Scott Lang finding the suit. The second clip is about setting up their plan. The third is about Lang experiencing being small. The MTV clip is about Lang's first moments out of prison. Ant-Man also came out with TV spots. The first clip shows some new footage. The other video shows Falcon talking to Lang. Marvel also released a few featurettes of Ant-Man. The first one focuses on this being a heist movie. The second one is about recruiting Scott Lang. The third is about meeting the supporting cast. And the last featurette is about Yellow Jacket. Marvel released the highlights of the London premiere of Ant-Man. In this video, many of the cast shared their thoughts on the premiere. This is an interesting video and lasts about 2 minutes. Flicks in the City shared a video on the Ant-Man London press conference. The panel only involved 3 of the cast and director Peyton Reed. Paul Rudd shared his new appreciation for ants. Reed talked about how much Edgar Wright was involved in the initial script. He says that without Wright, the movie would have never happened. Michael Pena talked about how his character was created. Michael Douglas spoke about how this movie was the first time he had to work with CGI. Then they talked about how involved in comics they were as children. They then talked about what insect they would be if they had the choice. Rudd then talks about his dedication on making his body healthy. Douglas talks about how impressed he was when they made him look 30 years younger in the beginning of the movie. Reed then goes on to talk about how Marvel Studios focuses more on the subgenre than the superhero aspect. He then goes on to say that he would like to make a sequel. This is a very funny 30-minute video. The cast of Ant-Man had an interview with MTV. The cast talk about their past and current feelings about killing bugs. It is a fun 2-minute interview. In another MTV video, the cast talk about Paul Rudd. It is another great video that lasts only 45 seconds. Rudd had a couple of solo interviews. In his interview with The Guardian, Rudd talks about his life growing up. He says that he felt like an outsider because he had 2 English parents and was Jewish in Kansas. He found that making fun of himself made his friends laugh. Rudd briefly talks about how he likes being viewed as a nice person instead of something else. At the end, he talks about the Ant-Man script. This is a good read if you want to know more about Paul Rudd. In the interview with Boston Globe, Rudd talks about waiting to see how the movie does before thinking about a sequel. He also strayed away from the conversation about Edgar Wright. He then says how he wanted the movie to focus on what the characters are going through. In the end, he said he would like an Ant-Man helmet for himself, but he was unable to get one. New York Post had an interview with Corey Stoll. Stoll talks about how he and his friends would dreamcast Patrick Stewart as Professor X in the early 90s. Stoll is a big comic book fan. In this interview, Peyton Reed mentions about working with Stoll and how that a movie is only as good as its villain. He had good things to say about Stoll. This interview was a short read. In a short interview with New York Daily News, Evangeline Lilly talks about female characters in superhero movies. She says that she feels a lot of pressure in doing her character right. In this film, she feels that she is representing women at large. She says that she used to idolize women like Princess Leia from Star Wars and Catwoman from Batman Returns. In the end, she says that it is an honor to potentially be in a role that could influence young girls. Peyton Reed was interviewed by the Toronto Sun. He talks about the script. He says that a lot of the story came from Edgar Wright and Joe Cornish's script. When meeting with Adam McKay and Paul Rudd, they thought of ways to change the script to include more of the comic. He lastly talks about how he wanted this film to look realistic. Michael Douglas and Peyton Reed had an interview with Digital Spy. In this interview, Douglas talks about how he secretly thought about doing a superhero movie. Before he was approached by Marvel, he spoke with Jack Nicholson and Danny DeVito about it. His son also encouraged him. Later in the interview, he talked about how he would love to see his wife play Janet Van Dyne if the opportunity came up. He then talks about how he hasn't talked to anyone about reprising his role. In the portion with Reed, he states that Janet was not in the original script that much. They felt that they needed to add a little bit more about her. He then goes on to say that there might be clues about her when Scott Lang enters the quantum realm. He later talks about the post-credit scenes. He said that he directed one of the two. He lastly says that he hopes Edgar Wright sees the movie. Superhero Hype spoke with Kevin Feige recently. In this interview, they talked about Ant-Man. They spoke about the connections in Ant-Man to the rest of the MCU and how it is still like a standalone movie. They then talk about the element of humor in the MCU. They move on to Ant-Man appearing in other movies. After this, they mention that heroes will be introduced when they are needed for the sake of the story. This is a long but interesting read. In our last news for Ant-Man, WHIH News released an exclusive clip of the security footage involving Scott Lang. This video shows how he broke into VistaCorp and became a cybercriminal. This video is less than 2 minutes long. Well, that's our news for part 2. Part 3 will be released shortly. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.